Hello, everybody. This is Mike from the Hey, Are You Still There podcast. My wife Beth and I would like to invite you to join us each week as we examine life at the intersection of marriage, family, careers, and ministry. Through 28 years of ministry, 26 years of marriage, 23 years of professional careers, and 21 years of being parents to 3 kids, our fun and honest discussions promise to have something for everyone. And now, on to the show. Hello, everybody. This is Mike.
And Beth. Sorry.
Beth, I was going to introduce myself, say this is Hey, Are You Still There? And then introduce you as the star of the show.
Sorry. I got a little excited.
You are excited because you love to talk travel.
I do, and I'm excited about this.
I know. This is part 2 of our 3-part travel series. We just recently took a trip to Europe, spent some time in 3 different countries, and part 1 was focused on Vienna, Austria, and the time we spent around there. So if you have not listened to that, you can go back and check it out. But today we have a brand new country we're going to be talking about, and that country is what?
The Czech Republic.
Now, is it the Czech Republic? Because sometimes I see it's like Czechslia or something. Like, what do you, I call it the Czech Republic.
I do too, because I thought and back when we grew up too, it was Czechoslovakia. Remember that?
Yeah, and then it was split into 2 countries.
Yeah, and so it gets, but I mean, if you look it up, I think it says it could be Czechia, but
Czechia.
Yeah, or something, or Czech Republic, but I don't know. I think it's known as both, so maybe but I don't know how to say the second one.
I don't either.
So I'm going to stick with Czech Republic.
And someone as me who cannot pronounce words very well anyway, and I'm also from the South.
Me too.
I'm just going to say Czech Republic because that's easier.
Well, and that way you'll just get our Southern drawl as we say Czech Republic, because the other word, people would be like, what are they even talking about? They won't know. Yeah.
So, on our last podcast, we left off on our final night there in Vienna. We got up the next morning, grabbed some breakfast real early at the hotel, and then walked out the front door. And who did we meet?
We met our guide, Pavlina. I hope I'm saying her name correctly, but she is from a company called Side Trip, and that's who we decided to use for our transportation. And I did a lot of research on it and was a little nervous because it's the first time I've done anything like this.
And why? Because originally you were going to just put us on a train.
Yeah.
And just ship us from, Vienna to Krakow. And that was going to be our trip. But you chose to do, why did you choose this? Because it was a long day. It was a full day. We left around 8 o'clock that morning
and pulled
into the hotel about 6 o'clock that night. So that's quite a while. That's a 10-hour trip by car.
Right.
Why?
So when I researched everything, I looked at a lot of different options, because we'll talk later even about when we were leaving, how we ended up flying out of Frankfurt, Germany. That by far was the fastest and best to do by plane, because in Europe, they do have some lower budget airlines. I don't want to say they're like Frontier. I don't know. It's just cheaper to fly within Europe. I had never done that before until this trip. But
it's like flying from state to state here.
Exactly.
Like if we're in North Carolina, if we're flying to Nashville, that's normally a 7-hour drive from where we're at, but it's probably a 2-hour flight.
And it's not going to be that expensive most of the time. Right. But we know airline prices are crazy. But, with airline flights, I didn't seriously pursue that option because I knew you would have to go get to the airport, get there early, do your luggage and all of that. So I didn't want to deal with that. So the train was my default. That was that's going to make the most sense. But when I started to look at the train routes, there's no direct train, not just like a high-speed train or whatever from Vienna to Krakow. And it was going to be probably still, I don't remember exactly, but I still think it was going to be 6 or 7 hours. Also, if we were traveling alone, the train would 100% be cheaper, because I think it was like 120 or 100 to 120 euros or dollars or whatever per person. But when you add 3 people taking that long train trip, well, that's already added up. So I was doing the math. I was looking at that. The other thing with the train is I knew we would get to see some of the countryside, because you've seen how on the train, sometimes you're kind of underground, sometimes there's nothing, but sometimes you're seeing the countryside, but you're not really like experiencing the country. And I knew even if we changed trains, we would have all of our luggage with us, because this wasn't like just an outing, a tour where we're going to go somewhere for a few hours and come back and take a tour like our other tours. We would have our luggage, and we would either have to find luggage lockers at the train if we wanted to stop and explore a city along the way. So I was researching alternatives, like what are the different ways? And, I even thought about renting a car, and there were so many things, but somehow this group Side Trip popped up, and they advertised that it was kind of like a combination of the best of both worlds. It's a mechanism by car to transport you from one city to another. They don't only do Vienna to Krakow. They do, like, I think Vienna to Budapest and other places like that. But they also will...
It's almost like a long trip Uber.
It is. It's
with a tour guide.
But an Uber trip with a tour guide that will carry your luggage and stop and tell you things along the way. So, going in, I went in a little blind, and I took a chance because they had a lot of reviews for the other trips, not so much for this one. And the one thing that did confuse me slightly during booking is they talked about, they offer these trips sometimes to groups. So like, if enough people had signed up for this trip, I think we would have had the option between a private tour, which is what we had, and typically is a little more expensive, or like if it were one of their more popular routes, they might have like a small van, and you might be with 10 people, like the 3 of us and, 6 or 7 other people that we don't know. That wasn't an option for us, because I don't think this trip I think it's a newer one, and it's not quite as popular for people. So
not a lot of people traveling from Vienna to Krakow.
I guess
not via car.
Well, not via car like that, unless they have their own.
Or even train. If you think about, you said there's not a direct.
There's not. Yeah. And so what happened was I booked this well in advance online. And when you book, they'll have you book it, and then they make it clear that, the trip's not fully booked until you fully paid, and they send you a link and you pay. And then they basically tell you, like, this is all you need. You have a confirmation number, that's all you're going to have to show the person. And we're going, for at least the private tour, they asked me what my hotel was so that they could pick us up there and they would deliver us to the hotel. So that was another thing that was really appealing about it, because knowing this trip will be a longer one, I was, it is harder when you're getting, again, into another country. You don't know their transportation. You've got all of your luggage, and then you've got to get to your hotel. So it was really, really appealing to have this idea of being picked up and dropped off, but being able to see a country that was really just a, quote, added bonus that I was not anticipating getting to see. So that's a lot of words to explain, but there was a lot of thought that went into it. And so we took a chance on it, and I think it was fabulous.
Yeah. So, stepped out of the hotel. Pavlina was there.
They had messaged me the night before by email and said, this is going to be your driver. You can contact her on WhatsApp. I have WhatsApp. So I messaged her that night and just said, hey, this is Beth. I messaged her on WhatsApp. If there's any problems, text me. So since I'd already messaged her, she messaged me that morning and shared her location. So not only was she like exactly on time, they had said, be ready at 8. And I told you and Josh we'd be ready like 10 minutes ahead of time. She was exactly on time, but I was able to watch her location. So we were able to sit and have our fancy cappuccinos. We didn't talk about that as much, but in Europe, here where everybody's just pouring you a pot of coffee or whatever at the restaurants, pretty much all the hotels and restaurants have these fancy cappuccino espresso machines that grind the coffee and all. So that's an added bonus too that we had in our hotel. So while we waited, we could go get an espresso or a cappuccino and just sit and drink that while we waited for her to be right on time, which was great.
She shows up. I don't know what I was expecting, but she was not what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
She was a lot more charming and very nice and down to earth.
Yeah, not at all like stiff or, I mean, very professional, but not like, but just very, very personable. Warm. Yeah, very warm. And she was driving a Skoda. Isn't that what it is? Skoda.
It was a car I'd never heard of, but it's some European car that's all over the place.
Oh, it's very popular. And it had like the side trip logo. So it was great to identify. So we just roll our stuff out and get in the car. And like you said, she's super charming and excellent English. Excellent. And so immediately I'm asking her, like, where are you from? Because and she is from Czech Republic. We found out later she has lived and traveled everywhere and speaks, I can't even count how many languages, and, has a master's and just a fascinating person that's really lived in a really fascinating life. But being that she was from Czech Republic too, I feel like that enhanced it even more for us. And so one of the first things she asked us as soon as we sat down, she told us if we wanted to hook up our music, we could. But at that point, we'd already worn Josh out, so he didn't seize that opportunity. But the other thing I forgot to mention is when I was booking this, when you go to side trips, they have like kind of an itinerary. They don't tell you the exact times, but they're like, this trip takes about 10 hours. We'll pick you up around 8. You'll be delivered around 6. And you'll make these 3 stops along the way. And you can read about the 3 stops. And the 3 stops, I'll talk about what we were going to do. But there were 2 towns or villages or whatever you want to call them in Czech Republic. And then there was one, she described it as like a large hole in the ground. And that's kind of what the picture looked like. It looked like it was sort of like one of those things like, the equivalent in the States might be if you're in the East Coast, like you're driving down the highway, you see the exit for the Blue Ridge Parkway. There's a stop off on the Blue Ridge Parkway to see like a small cave or a waterfall. That's kind of what I anticipate it would have been. She was awesome because she said to us pretty quickly before she even took off, like, I'm happy to take you to that. I know that's one of the options. Or we can add on a separate little town or village. And later when we were chatting, she explained to me that, because she has traveled so extensively and lived in Canada for a while, that outdoor hole in the ground that I'm not describing very well is really exciting for people who may come from big cities and not get a lot of exposure to nature. But, when she has people from the US and Canada and places like that have these massive national parks and hiking and all the natural things we have, she recognized that it might not be the coolest thing in the world for us. So when I heard that and she described it and she showed a picture to us, I was like, we were all like, what do you want to do? And we decided that we would do this separate village. And so I really liked that too, because they say they'll try to like flex the itinerary to what you want. Now, of course, that has to be within reason, because you can't have a 10-hour tour and then say, well, I want you to go 4 hours off your route to take me somewhere, or I want to go stay somewhere for 5 hours. But I really liked that she had put that thought into it.
Yeah. So we got in the car, we took off, we drove a little ways.
It wasn't far.
I felt like we drove about an hour and a half.
Probably.
Maybe. Something like long enough for Josh and I to go back to sleep.
Yes, and I did not. Because what did we do? What did we do?
Beth sat in the front seat. I knew that she would want to talk to this chick nonstop. And I had no idea that this Pavlina would also love to talk nonstop. So her and Beth talked for 10 hours straight.
Yeah.
They never took a breath. And they talked about everything
under
could
the sun.
possibly
Yes.
talk about. And it didn't even have to relate to our trip. They were just talking about anything and everything. They were like best friends by the end. And Josh and I just sat in the back, never said a word.
And dozed off and slept.
Dozed off at times and just, put in our earbuds and chilled out. And we got to the first little town, and it was a little village.
I will say, though, too, I'm sure, though, if I'd been one that wanted to stay quiet or listen to music, she would have adapted to that. But for me, it was very enriching to have the conversations. Because
she seemed like she enjoyed it.
I feel like I'd be best friends with her if we lived nearby. I feel like we'd hang out and have a lot in common. But I feel like it just enriched the experience because, like, to your point, we were talking about everything from family dynamics to, kind of like growing up in a country that has been, at times under different occupation from different countries and just anything you can imagine. Like, what do you do? What kind of jobs do people have? I mean, we covered everything. And so that really enhanced it for me. But we crossed the border because the first town we went into was not in Austria. Were you asleep at this point? Because I think I was expecting a little more. You're crossing the border into another country. And I know we're in the EU. So a benefit is when you're crossing, you don't have to stop and have somebody checking your passport and everything. But I guess I still thought there'd be something, but it's not. It's just like driving from North Carolina to Virginia. And, it's like, welcome to Virginia. Here it was just like, okay, we have exited Austria and now we are in Czech Republic. Yeah.
And what was the name of the first town we went to?
Okay, I'm going to not get this right, but it's Mikulov, like Mikulov or something. It's a very small, cute, historic town, so close to the border that at one point when she took us up to look, you could see into like villages in Austria. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, what did you think about it when you saw that town?
I thought it was great. It reminded me of those little Austrian towns outside of Vienna that we talked about on our last podcast. Small, felt old.
The cobblestone streets.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like old world style, but everyone there was super nice and it was clean and beautiful. And it
had a massive square, just like we talked about before. I mean, not as massive as some we've seen, but a square in the center of town. Mm-hmm. And she told us about the statue, like a lot of them have like these plague statues or whatever kind of in the center that the church would put up sort of like, because they were so grateful that people had survived the plague. And it had some like historic buildings she told us about. And there was like we didn't go in it, but I never know whether these things are, I think it was a castle. I never know what's a castle and a palace. Yeah, I think it was a castle.
It was a really big building.
The Mikulov castle that you could see from the hill. But probably the most exciting thing about this one is it's 9-something in the morning. And what we learned that this town is known for wine. And another thing is it is a town that people might go to visit, if they are vacation, if they're native to that country, but it is not a place that like lots of Americans are stopping in. And I can't remember I think it was that town. We stopped to order coffee and
we ran into that lady.
Yeah, we were speaking English, because she's translating for us, thank goodness, because I don't know Czech. And a lady comes up and says, "Excuse me, where are you from?" And I told her North Carolina. And she was like, "I never hear English here." And immediately I felt like that already made this really cool because we were seeing what I felt like was a more authentic version of like the Czech Republic. We're in a town that, isn't overrun by, there are no McDonald's or anything. It's not overrun by tourists speaking English. It's truly a place that it's the people who live there. And then lots of people who like to do kind of these bike wine tours, like stopping at wineries. So we had that lady had married somebody that was from that town.
Yeah, she's from New York.
Yeah, upstate New York. And
where I think where they live now.
They live in New York,
they were there in that town visiting his family.
And she had said she'd already been up, like, doing stuff with the grapevines and stuff, because his family does that. So that was really fascinating, to be that close to it. But Then we were told if we wanted to go try wine, we could, because in that town, you can have a wine tasting any time of day. You know, they're not going to be like, oh no, it's 7 a.m., which for us, it was 9 a.m. So I was like, okay, so we get our coffee, then we walk over to this wine shop. And do you want to tell a little bit about that?
It had like a drink machine, like a Coke machine, where you would get like Coke or Sprite or whatever out of it. But it was various wine bottles, and they had it all set up to where a dry wine dispenser, and sweet wine dispenser, and a white wine dispenser, and a red wine dispenser. They were all there, and you just go in, and the lady would be like, "All right, what do you want to taste?" And she would just give us a tasting, and you eventually figure out what you want to buy, and you buy it.
And thank goodness they took credit cards, because one thing I do want to say about this day, we were in 3 different countries that had 3 different languages and 3 different currencies within essentially a 10-hour period, because we left Austria in Vienna, where they use the euro and spoke German, ended up in our first Czech town, and they speak Czech, and they have, I can't remember the name of their currency, but they have their own currency.
Yeah, Czech currency.
But the wine tasting was great, because you pay, I think it turned out to be like $1.50 American or something for a glass to use. And then a glass of wine was cheaper than water. Oh, yeah.
Like the wine in this place, because I saw they have that there. And so wine, and it was delicious, but it was super cheap.
Yeah. And they had, and it was funny because they were like, does Josh want to try any? You know, it's like, here's our little 15-year-old.
He was like, yeah.
9 a.m.
Well, I guess
we're like, you'll be fine without that. But it was really neat, because they also told us kind of what their favorites were, which kind of aligned with what we liked. And we were able to buy a bottle or 2 of wine to get it home. But just the people in that little wine shop were great. And we just were kind of remarking about, you know, just how inexpensive and how nice it was, you know, compared to like prices and stuff we might see elsewhere.
Yeah. So
I don't know how long we were there. I don't know, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, probably at least.
I was going to say an hour.
Yeah, it probably was an hour. You're right. Yeah.
I feel like we spent about an hour in each town.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
So it probably would have been about 7 hours on the road.
Yeah.
And about an hour in each town. Yeah. Give or take.
Right.
So then we got back on the road, and the next town was literally not far. 15 minutes away, I feel like. It was not far at all.
And it was Lednice. I know I'm butchering these names. Lednice. And that's the town that had, again, I think this one was called the Lednice, again, I'm saying it wrong, Chateau. But it had these very immaculate gardens. It had like the English style gardens as well as the French style gardens, because the French ones were more like, I think, what we'd seen at Belvedere, where it's very manicured and stuff, and English is a little more natural. So you could walk, and there were literally people out taking care of the gardens and people touring, school groups. That was another thing we were able to ask. We were able to get little facts we didn't know, because in Austria as well, we kept seeing all these school groups, and we're like, what is happening? And she said that they would almost all finish school at the end of June in both countries, I think. And so because they're finished with most of their schoolwork, they're doing a lot of field trips, essentially, to these places. So she took us around the outside of this chateau and it was beautiful to see the gardens. We peeked in the greenhouse. One thing that was really cool about that place was, while we were standing looking at the greenhouse, she pointed out a stork's nest way up in a tree. And it was a stork with babies. And given that Jacob's studying birds and stuff, I mean, that was kind of fun. And then we remember looking at the stables. The horse stables were fancier than like our house at this place. It was like the horse stables were immaculate and beautiful. So we did that. And yeah, I was trying to remember what else about that. They also, we went back to so she gave us a time when we could walk around. Was that the place? They had these, like, it's hard to describe, things underground you could look at where they literally would put like the trees and stuff in the winter. It had like skylights or something.
It was like a below ground greenhouse.
Yeah.
Where they would take trees and massive plants that they would put out in the summertime.
Yeah.
They would store them below ground in like these little incubator type things with like glass tops. And
that you could kind of look down and see the tree. It was really fascinating. And then she asked if we wanted more coffee, which I never turned down. So I got to experience yet another coffee shop, and Josh got like a soda or something, you know, so we were able to do that and take a restroom break if we needed it and stuff before we hit the road again.
Yeah. And then it was a little bit of a drive before our next place.
This one was
maybe like 3 hours or so, something like that. And
you could see some of the countryside, which was a lot more like our area, like home.
It was very rural.
It was very kind of rolling hills with farmland. Just you know, so in a highway going, so very similar to like I feel like what we see around here. So yeah.
So then we get to this next town, and this is the one that she added on, right?
No, I think the first one was the one she added on.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we get to this last town, and this is where we're gonna, and it's a city.
Yeah.
And she's excited because it has the university there. Mm-hmm. And this is where she went to college. And so it was kind of like Pavlina's reality tour.
Yeah.
She was showing us like where she lived and where she went to school.
And she was like, and this is a very popular hangout spot. And this is where people go to church. And this is where, you know, how many people live in the dormitory room and stuff. Right. So it was really neat to have that.
And unbeknownst to us, we actually happened to roll up on graduation day.
Oh, yeah.
So there was a lot of activity around the college. And so it took us a while to find a parking space, but then we got parked, and then we just kind of made our way walking around the town, through the town.
That town is Olomouc. I don't know. Olomouc. And it was the largest, to your point, of the 3 towns. Yeah, but it has that big.
It felt Vienna-ish. It wasn't as big as Vienna, but it felt like more of a city than the first. The first 2 were just villages, towns.
Yes, because this had like more. It had like the public transportation, like the tram going through, and of course, again, cobblestone streets and stuff. But the other 2 were literally like you had the big square and the little places out around it. But, you know, that was kind of it, where this one, to your point, had restaurants and stores, and not that the others didn't, but it was just bigger and much more lively because of graduation and all the people that were in there. So she let us like park, and we went through this cool like place that it seems like this is one of those connection points for colleges everywhere, but Maria's at School of the Arts, and they've got kind of this like bridge tunnel thing where there's all this graffiti on it. And we walked through this area there that had, we got Josh's picture, kind of like this underground area that had like a lot of graffiti and stuff on it. But it wasn't like it was everywhere. It was inside that tunnel. And that was where we had lunch. The place we ate, I really liked. I think it was the NATE Cafe. Is that what it? But they help people that have fallen on hard times, whether they're recovering from like substance use, or maybe they've had issues with their kids and what would be the equivalent of like DSS here or something. They help these individuals get jobs and things. And so, as is expected in a European type country like this, we sat outside under an umbrella. It kept looking like it was going to rain. I was a little nervous, but they had little things like quiche and just different salads and again, coffee and things if you wanted it. So we did that, and that was great. Do you want to talk about your shop you found? Yeah,
we were, again, I mentioned in the last podcast, I'm a comic book collector. So anytime we were in a foreign country, I like to, if we happen to stumble upon I'm not going to go way out of my way, but if we happen to stumble upon a bookstore or a comic book store, I will pick up a book in that country's native language. And so we stumbled upon a used bookstore that had some old comic books that were, I say old. They were. I mean, now you're looking back, they're from the 90s, early 90s. So they're 30 years old, that were in Czech. And I was like, okay, well, this is interesting, maybe. But then I looked, and there was actually a comic book store just a short walk away. So we decided to go check out that store. So we go to that store, and that was the one, right? We're in the same.
No, you're in Krakow that we went to comic book store. This is the one with the lady and she didn't take cash. It was the really old bookstore, and
yes,
you're
right.
confused.
The second one is where we went to the comic book store.
Yeah.
This one was just a used bookstore. She didn't take cash, and
which isn't unusual. I mean, didn't take cards. Which isn't unusual. But of course, I didn't have any money in Czech, but we found an ATM and we were able to go
we got
get
some money, and it was the one that was right beside the record store.
Yes.
So it was Josh, our youngest, is totally into music and records, and so he was in heaven. Wanted him to find him some Czech rock music, maybe. And so he found, so I still haven't listened to it, but it's something.
It's a CD, and it was like, it has cats on the front, and the name on it was something, and basically the translation of the title of it is something like the sound that cats make, which would be meow. That's like the title of it. But yeah, so that was fun. And then you were able to
And then I went next door, and they actually had some Czech comics. And so I was looking for Marvel or something, that just translate, but they actually had some that were published there.
Yeah.
And so I picked up one of those, and I was real excited about that to kind of add that to my collection. So Josh and I both walked away from those two stores very happy.
And that's another way too that she made this tour. Of course, she had to kind of keep us on track. Like, okay, well, we might spend a little less time doing something else because she's on a schedule and she's promised to get us there at 6. But she was flexing again to what we wanted and needed. We also went to St. Michael's Church, I think is the name of it, which again was another of these church styles with these massive domes in the ceiling with the beautiful paintings all over the church. But that's the one that we were able to explore around, not only going inside, but we walked around the outside of the hall, and they had a series of paintings that depicted like Jesus's last days before the cross, like Garden of Gethsemane and all that stuff. So we just walked and looked at all that. And then she took us down, like we went down these little stairs into like the basement. And there was like some water there for like in a little kneeling prayer area that someone there uses. So again, I just felt like I was getting some type of like off the beaten path tour that I went.
Like it was some kind of like secret catacomb.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. Yeah.
She had to turn the light on to get us down there, but she knew where it was and took us, and it was great.
And then we also went to the Astronomical Clock. I was just blown away by that. I think other places like big cities may have something similar, but I think it was like the city hall or something. But she explained the pictures that were painted, and I think it was painted during the time of the Soviets, and they had like one of the paintings on the side was like a Soviet worker, and I can't remember what the other painting on the side was, but you had this massive clock, and like one hand would be like the second hand, and one would be like the day, and one was like the hour. But she taught us about your name day, and on this clock was this massive wheel with all of these names. So like for Beth, they didn't have Beth, but Elizabeth, you could look it up and see what your name day is. And she said,
they had all 365 days represented, and every day had at least 2 names.
Yeah.
So you're talking well over 700 names are on this massive clock.
Yeah. And they celebrate you like it's another birthday on your name day. Like you get flowers or candies or stuff like that.
Yeah. So there was Miguel.
Yes.
And so Michael. And I think it was like September 30th or something like that. So on that day, I would be honored because my name would be Miguel.
That's right. So it was just a really neat clock. It was beautiful. I mean, and again, massive, like the entire side of the building. And something like that, I feel like in a lot of other places might be so crowded with tourists, but we were able to stand in front of it and get pictures. She also always took our pictures, so we got lots of pictures of the 3 of us together. So that was a cool thing. And there was also some sand art. you saw, remember that was that big, I don't know but somebody had like done this amazing.
They were doing this remodel to the church. And so somebody had come out and built a giant sand sculpture of it.
Yeah.
During the remodel. I guess so you could kind of see what it would look like. But it was really cool. It was massive.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was 8 feet tall. And
it was impressive.
10 feet wide. It was huge. And it was made with just sand. Like you do at the beach.
Yeah. And then we walked around and got some pictures up and down the little streets. And when it was almost time to go, she had parked in this parking deck. And she's like, I'm going to let you go in. I think at that point we were in the St. Wenceslas Cathedral, which I always think about that Christmas song. But I think that was the name of it. It was this massive cathedral up on a hill. And she said she would go get the car and meet us up there while we looked. Right before we went in, Josh, and you saw the guy, the heart balloon graffiti.
Oh, Banksy.
Yeah. There was a picture there, not on the church, but on a building just before that.
Copying him, his art. It looked just like it. And then you come to find out that
in Krakow,
they have an exhibit, not obviously of his art, because his art is on walls all over the world. Right. But it was kind of an art gallery that was reproductions that you could look at. But here in this town, it had this random
thing. So we saw that. And then we went into this last cathedral, which was more the dark Gothic kind of style. And we're able to have plenty of time to sit and look at that and enjoy it. And then you and Josh came outside and you tried to like join a school group or something.
We were almost in a class picture, and that was fun. We came down and sat down on the steps, just waiting on Beth to finish and for Pavlina to come there. And there was a school group that was there. And I'm going to guess these kids were probably 4th or 5th grade. And next thing we know, they're all sitting down on the steps, and I get kids on one side of me and these 2 girls plopped down on the other side of me. Like, I guess they thought that we were chaperones. And when I realized what was going on, the teacher never did say, you're not supposed to be in this picture. I mean, I really think if we'd have stayed there,
you'd have just been in this random class picture.
Yeah. But I was like, ooh, we need to move. And I got up and the girl looked at me like, oh, you're not here? You're not with us?
Yeah, you're not from around these parts? So then, but they missed the picture opportunity. We got all the pictures we wanted, and then she picked us back up, and we drove the remainder of the way. And just the same as entering, once we entered Poland, there was little fanfare. You could see, I can't remember which border. There was one of the borders where you could see where there had been a gate and everything. And they had some toll roads. That was a little different. But other than that, again, crossed into our
And you're also so close. She was pointing out, she's like, if you look out the right side of your window, that's Slovakia.
Yeah, that was really neat.
I mean, you're right there at it.
And that was really another thing that was just fascinating, kind of asking her about the different countries and what it's like, because at times these countries were one country that now aren't the same country. And so just asking kind of like, well, what are the relations like between Czech Republic and Slovakia versus Austria and Czech? Because, when you're doing the tours in Austria, they make a big deal about the Austrian Empire used to have Czech Republic and all of these others, so it's just interesting, I think, hearing the perspective of people that live there. And, one of the things that was so interesting, though, that we reflected on later, at one point she was talking about just something with her parents and sisters, and, it was like a generational dynamic. And Mike and I later, when we got out of the car, we're like, this is exactly what you have in America. Our parents, their generation looks at things differently than our generation. And then the next generation looks at it a little differently. So it was just kind of fascinating, I think, to hear those commonalities, but also to think about the difference in what living for a while under communism and Russian occupation versus, going everything that happened during World War II. I think it was just fascinating to think about what those types of things, how they change your culture, how they change people's approach to life. Because when we think about even in the States, not just generational differences, but like our grandparents who were in the Great Depression and things had a very different view on saving money and frugality and things than people who've never endured things like that. And so I think that also translates. I was just fascinated in thinking about, how does that impact the spirit of a community and a culture to have been sometimes under occupation, to have lived through communism, and then even what was it like when communism ends? Because, it's not like you just snap your fingers and you've gone from this, like, we're communist and this is the way every business and every company, everything works, to like, now we're not. And so in the next day, there's just a complete mental mind shift. Those things take time to change. And so we were just having some really cool conversations about that, but also conversations about fun places to travel and favorite places she's lived and just things like that. So, and she gave us tips on things for when we got to Krakow, but basically, literally, she pulled up in front of our hotel almost exactly at 6:00 as planned.
Yeah.
Yeah. And dropped us off.
Yeah. So I would say if you are traveling in that part of Europe and you can do this tour, we can't recommend it enough.
And I can't speak for the other tours because I have not been on those, but this is one of the lesser known tours. So I'm sure the others, are probably fabulous or, just as good or better. And so again, it's called Side Trip. I plan to go and do a review, like a 5-star review for them, because I just thought
I would just call up and be like, where is Pavlina going this week? I'm going to take that tour.
That's what you should do. Plan your when people are like, how did you choose which countries to visit? Well, I'm going to go to whichever one that she's going to be my tour guide because she's that awesome. So it was really great. And I really enjoyed getting to know her. And this was the day that for me, I was the most nervous about in planning this trip because I felt like it was a gamble. I wasn't clear. And to your point about not knowing what to expect, I didn't know if we'd have some warm personal person. I didn't know how strong the accents would be, how hard communication would be. I didn't know if they'd be like on some tours where it's almost a script. I had no idea what to expect. And it literally felt like we just met a friend that one of us went to college with or something, and we hung out for the day. That's the way it felt. Mm-hmm. It was very comfortable.
Yeah. And, we did Austria, Czech Republic, and Poland. And this was the one day of the trip that, I don't want to say I didn't care about, but I didn't really care about.
Because you didn't know what to expect.
Yeah,
you didn't
we're just driving through, whatever. And Josh and I both felt like this was our favorite day. Like, we loved Vienna, we loved Krakow, we loved everything about this trip. But we were both like, man, the Czech Republic might be our favorite country out of the three.
And that was the other interesting thing we talked about is I think there's a difference in places that you want to go spend a week or a weekend because they're super fun to visit and a place you would want to live. And I think what you and Josh expressed was, Vienna is kind of like going to New York City. You've got museums. You're never going to be bored. You've got so much to do. But in the end, do you want to live in we all grew up rural or suburbs, we're not probably going to thrive in a big city. We need our green space. And Czech Republic definitely had those little villages and offered that. And I don't know how much of this too was just that section of the Czech Republic, how much of it was that we were off the beaten path, but it did seem like the country, those little towns seemed like the places that all of us were like, if you were like, you've got to move to one of the places we visited, that's where we would. If you
got to move to Europe, pick a place, I would pick the Czech Republic.
But we would be challenged there because they do expect you to speak Czech.
They speak English.
Yeah, but they expect you if you work there. Czech. If you work, that was one of the things we learned from her. So if you work there, you're going to speak Czech. And so that would probably prevent us from living there unless unless we lived with her and she just went around with us and translated everything that we were saying for us.
That foreign language, learning a foreign language.
At this stage of our lives?
Well, any stage of my life.
Yeah.
That part of my brain never existed. And so I have always struggled, I took French in high school. I never learned it. I did enough to get through it. We've gone on tons of mission trips. We've gone to Mexico many times. And you would think that I would have picked up on some Spanish, but it doesn't stick. So there's some part of my brain that just does not click with learning another language. I barely know English. And so it would be, I'd be impossible. I do not think I could move there and learn that language.
But they all learn English. And I think she had indicated, like so many places too, some people might not feel as confident speaking it, but they all can. And the other thing, I don't know if this was just her and she's an outlier for her country, but she spoke a little Russian. She could speak enough Polish to get us through the toll areas. She had worked for a while in Belgium, and there's like 4 languages that are spoken there. She worked in Canada. Her English was fabulous.
Does she speak Canadian?
We'll make sure we'll put that out there, that we'll add that to the list. But she just spoke. So, that's the other thing. I feel like so many people there, because they grow up immersed around these other countries, they are bilingual. And that was the last tidbit, fascinating thing. I don't know if it was Slovakia. There was no Ukraine. There was one of the countries she was talking about, but some of those languages too, she said, they're not exactly the same language, but they're close enough that you can talk to each other. And she was trying to kind of describe how it works, but to a person who can only speak English, because I'm terrible at Spanish and didn't learn any others, it's hard for me to even comprehend that someone else would come in and be able to. The closest I guess I can get to it is sometimes, some of the Spanish words or Italian words look sort of like English and you can piece it together, but I would never be able to have a conversation with somebody like that. But again, just learning those little tidbits of things we picked up that just made our life richer, that otherwise we would have not had that experience.
Yeah. So that does it. That wraps up our Czech Republic show. We have part 3, which will be coming up at some point soon, where we'll wrap up our Poland experience.
Now, I hope everybody doesn't now flood the Czech Republic, and then it's just going to be overrun with tourists and it's going to lose all that charm that we experienced. Hopefully that won't happen because, this podcast is so popular that could definitely
We do have an
happen.
International audience.
Yes.
So I'll
yeah.
have to go back and look and see if we have any in the Czech
The
Republic.
3 people that we may have in our international
But we might have
audience,
some Czech listeners and they may be disappointed. They didn't know we were coming.
Yes,
And,
exactly. Because they would want to meet the Hey, Are You Still There podcast.
Yeah, Mike and Beth from Hey, Are You Still There?
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Well, hey, like I said, be looking for the next part 3, our trip to Poland. We'll wrap up the series then. So thanks a lot for tuning in and sticking it out and learning a little more like we have about the Czech Republic. So this is Mike.
And Beth.
And this is Hey, Are You Still There?